And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vasel, and today we're taking a look at a game called Disciple Detective. I'm always interested in things like this on a personal level because there's very few games that are based on the Bible at all. And this one here, based on the 12 disciples, well actually 17, they added a few extra ones. And this is a deduction game, and I tend to like deduction games too. Where I was a bit concerned is it says it's cooperative and competitive, and if you watch my reviews, you know that I have a hard time believing that that is true. But despite that, let's take a look at how the game plays, and we'll be right back. Now this game can be played competitive or co-op, and honestly, the games play very similarly, except in competitive, you're trying to guess all your disciples first. In co-op, you're just trying to all do it together. So I'm going to talk about the co-op game here and just realize the competitive is very similar with some minor changes. You have a bunch of tokens here. If you lose all these tokens, clue tokens, you'll lose the game. Each player is going to be dealt a certain number of disciple cards. There are 17 disciple cards. So the 12 that are mentioned that you know about, there's also Matthias, Paul, Luke, Mark, and Lydia. And each of these cards has a number, but when you draw your cards, you're going to see the back of the cards. You're not going to be able to see what's on the front of each card. Now, each of these cards has characteristics on that card. First of all, they're numbered from 1 to 17. So characteristic is they're odd or even. Then, do they have another name that we know them by, an alias? In fact, in Bartholomew, he does. Do we know what city they originated from? Yes. Do we know who their father was? No. Do we know what their occupation was? No. Were they a writer of the book of the Bible? No. And then is there another special ability that would be listed at the bottom of the card? These are called quirks. Bartholomew actually cancels out everyone else's quirks. So, for example, Peter here is afraid. So even though there's an action in the game where you can order everybody in number order, Peter always is last. But if he's in the same hand as Bartholomew, then he's no longer afraid. You can see Peter has every attribute. And so you have a chart here that keeps track of all the disciples and the attributes and the different quirks that they might have. So you'll have these cards in your hand, and on your turn, you have different actions that you can take. You can give a trait clue. So I can basically say, all right, I'm going to do origin. And then you'll just touch every card that meets that clue. So if I'm playing and you touch a couple of my cards, I might say, oh, you said that this person here has an origin, so I'll mark that on my card so that I know. So now I don't know for sure that they're Bartholomew, but I'll be able to use this and this to figure out exactly who I have. You can also order the disciples in someone's hand, putting them in numerical order, but when you do that, you lose one of these tokens here. You can guess a disciple in your hand. So you can do that by essentially saying, this is John. Hooray, I got it right. I put this down, draw another card. If we guess all the disciples, we're going to win the game. If we guess wrong, then you lose another clue token. You'll discard the card and draw a new one to take its place. So the competitive is very similar to that, except you'll ask somebody, like, what do I have in my hand, and things like that. Now, the special abilities are really going to change things up. So Paul is injured, so he technically doesn't have occupation or writer, but if Luke's in the game at all, Paul's healed. If Paul's also visible, Mark is considered to have not any traits at all except for his number. James claims to be number 2 even though he's number 3. Judas always says the opposite about his traits. And then there's Lydia, Jude, Philip, and James, Les, and Andrew who have no special abilities. So that's how the game plays. So you're either all going to win together or one person will win if you're playing a competitive version. Now, the game comes with erasable markers, which is important because you write on the cards, and I like that you write on the cards. These tokens are fine. I love these charts here. They're very clear. The rule book is very easy to understand, and at the end talks a little bit about the disciples and tells you what we know about them. Like we know that John's father's name is Zebedee, and he was a fisherman, so there's that kind of information. It's a small box, and I like that you can write on the cards. They already have a laminate on them. But, and this is a really big but, I have to deduct kind of a whole point from the game. Because I have to say, having played this now, I like the concept of it, but holding these cards and asking people and then writing on the cards while you're holding them is very problematic. We would set the cards down and write on them and then pick them up and set them down and pick them up. Honestly, this game should have come with card holders, that you could have just set the cards in front of you. It would have made it a whole lot easier, and it's really problematic. Every single person I played with complained about this because you're holding these, you're holding the suspect in your hand, you have this in front of you. If you're playing competitive, you're trying to hide this from everybody else and doing that, and it just was problematic. That's the biggest problem I have. I guess if you bought card holders, that's less of a problem. Other than that, the components are fine. All right, let's talk about the theme first. I personally really like this theme, but I can see, it may not be everyone's jam, but you don't need to know the theme to play this game. The theme helps a little bit. You're like, that's Peter. That's what Judas would do. But it's just there's 17 different cards, and they have all the stuff, and it's all written out there clearly for them, and they have these different quirks. The quirks definitely make the game harder. In the rule book, they're like, hey, maybe for your first game or playing with younger people, you might want to play without the quirks. I highly recommend that because without the quirks, it's just easier, especially when you're playing with younger children. Just to keep track, because the fact that Judas is the opposite means you can never trust everything you have in your hand, and Peter's last in order. But I personally find the 17 card combination with the quirks and the numbers, it's fascinating. I'm sitting there the whole time trying to figure out, okay, they said this clue about this and this. That proves they're this, but wait, this card is here, so that can't be right. Of course, we already revealed this disciple, so I know that disciple's not in the game anymore. And this is definitely a game that gets easier as time goes by, as you figure out the disciples. But I thought it worked really well. Now, I said at the beginning, the competitive and cooperative thing, the competitive game is okay. I personally prefer the cooperative game because we're working together. With the competitive one, I feel like you might need to write down more information. Well, they asked this question, and that means they don't have Peter? I found that to be, I don't know, it just didn't work as well for me. The cooperative version is the one that I would promote playing. And it's tough. And you never know what cards everyone's going to have. There's 17 of them, but they're not all going to be out there right away. You're looking at everyone else's hands. I always find that kind of deduction style to be very interesting. So really, the only thing that's kind of keeping it down for a little bit for me is the fact that it gets very tiring to hold those cards the whole game and do deduction, and they should have included card holders. So again, it seems like a minor thing, but it should have been in here. That being said, I was pretty impressed with this. This is not a copy of some other game. This feels like a brand new game in its own right. And whether you're a fan of the disciples or not, you're going to like, I think, if you like deduction games, you're thinking about things, there's not a lot of things to think about, but the number of intersections between them I find to be very fascinating. And if you are someone who's a fan of the Bible, that's kind of neat to see this come to life. The artwork is well done. It's just a cool package. So, and I also think that it scales really well. It's a little easier with fewer players because you have more information that you know, they have it or I have it. But with more players, I think it also works really well. So check it out. This might be one that's gone under your radar, but it's one I would recommend. That's Disciple Detective. I'm Tom Vasel. We'll see you next time. Dice Tower Judgment approved.